an arrogant doctor humiliated a humble patient, mocking him in front of everyone, without realizing he was Keanu Reeves, the owner of the hospital. But when Keanu stood up, everything changed. What he did next will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu Reeves had always believed that kindness wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did quietly when no one was watching. To the world, he was a famous actor, a movie star known for his stoic charm and legendary roles. But to those who truly knew him, he was a man who carried his past quietly on his shoulders, a man shaped by loss, hardship, and a deep understanding of human suffering. Long before the fame, before the lights and cameras, Keanu had lived through some of life's hardest moments. His younger sister, Kim, had fought a brutal battle against leukemia for years. He had watched her struggle through countless hospital stays, had seen his parents strain under the weight of medical bills. He knew the silent desperation of sitting in cold waiting rooms, praying for good news, and the pain of knowing that sometimes money made the difference between hope and hopelessness. So when Keanu found himself in a position to help others, he didn't hesitate. Years ago, quietly and without public fanfare, he invested millions of dollars to build a private hospital in Los Angeles. But this wasn't just another medical facility for the rich and powerful. This was Keanu's mission, a hospital that treated everyone equally. It didn't matter if you had insurance, money, or influence. Here, everyone received dignity and care. That was the promise. And for a while, it seemed to work. The reports he received were glowing. Staff members were respectful, patients were cared for. The hospital was a model for what healthcare could be when compassion guided policy. But then, slowly, things changed. It started with a letter. Anonymous. A patient describing how she was treated like a burden because she couldn't pay. Then another complaint followed, about a doctor who was arrogant, dismissive, and cruel. Then more. They were quiet whispers at first, but they soon turned into an alarming pattern. Keanu read every word, each account twisting something deep in his gut. He held on to hope that it was all a misunderstanding, maybe a disgruntled employee or a patient who had a bad day. But Keanu wasn't a man who sat still and waited for others to fix things, especially not when it came to something so close to his heart. One crisp afternoon, he stood at the window of his modest apartment in Los Angeles, looking down at the city he loved. In his hands, he held another letter, this one from a nurse. She described patients being turned away, staff being bullied into silence, and a growing fear inside the hospital walls. Keanu's jaw tightened. "I need to see this myself," he murmured. He decided there would be no security detail, no press announcement, no VIP entrance, just Keanu, alone. He wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star today. He was just another person, walking through the doors of a place that was supposed to represent his deepest values. That evening, he changed into faded jeans and a weathered leather jacket. It was the same jacket he used to wear back when he was just another struggling actor, riding buses through downtown LA. His dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and he wore a simple baseball cap low over his eyes. He didn't shave. He wanted to blend in. His goal was simple: walk in as an ordinary patient, see the truth with his own eyes, and find out whether his dream had been corrupted. He grabbed his helmet and slung a duffel bag over his shoulder, climbed onto his old black Norton Commando motorcycle, and rode through the dark streets toward the hospital. The city was alive around him, but his mind was focused, his heart heavy. As he pulled up outside the tall glass doors of Reeves Memorial Hospital, he parked in the visitor's lot, just another man coming in for treatment. Standing there for a moment, he took a deep breath. This was more than just a visit. It was a test of his own ideals. He walked toward the entrance, his boots scuffing against the pavement. He felt the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't sure what he would find inside. Part of him hoped it was all an exaggeration, that people were just overreacting, that his hospital was still what he had dreamed it to be. But deep down, he knew better. He trusted his instincts. Something was wrong here, something that needed to be fixed. As the automatic doors slid open, Keanu stepped inside, unnoticed. The waiting room was crowded. Tired faces stared at cracked cell phone screens. A baby cried softly in the arms of a young mother. An elderly man leaned forward, clutching his chest, his breathing shallow. The walls were cold, the lighting harsh. Keanu scanned the room, his dark eyes taking in every detail. He approached the reception desk where a weary receptionist tapped away on a computer, not bothering to look up. "Good evening," Keanu said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'd like to see a doctor." The woman sighed. She glanced at his clothes, his scruffy appearance. "Name?" "John." It was the name he always used when he wanted to disappear. Just John. The receptionist barely acknowledged him as she pushed a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out. It's going to be a while." Keanu took the clipboard without complaint, glancing around again. He could already feel it. Something was off. The atmosphere was heavy, tense. People weren't being treated like people. They were numbers, or worse, they were being ignored. And that's when Keanu knew this was the right decision. He was going to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. Keanu took a slow breath as he sat quietly in the crowded waiting area. Around him, the room was filled with the hushed sounds of discomfort, occasional coughs, low murmurs, restless shifting. No one seemed at ease. It wasn't just the illness in the air, it was the atmosphere. Cold, indifferent. The kind of place where people sat for hours, not knowing if or when they'd be seen. He studied the woman across from him. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, gently rocking a toddler in her arms. The child whimpered softly, his skin pale and glistening with sweat. Keanu could tell the boy had a high fever. He recognized the way his little chest rose and fell too quickly, the mother's quiet panic just beneath the surface. The receptionist hadn't noticed, or maybe she had and didn't care. Keanu had watched her glance over, then returned to scrolling her screen as if nothing was wrong. Next to Keanu sat an older man, probably in his late 70s. His wrinkled hands clutched his chest from time to time. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Keanu could hear the faint rasping in the man's lungs each time he exhaled. Yet no one had approached him. No one had offered help. He simply sat there, staring down at the floor with quiet resignation. It was exactly what Keanu feared he'd find. A system designed to care for everyone had become twisted, rigid, and cold. The promise he had made years ago, to himself, to his sister, to every patient who walked through these doors, had been broken. And it was happening right here, in the building that bore his name. He shifted slightly in his chair as a man in an expensive suit strolled through the front doors. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the tile. Without even checking in at the desk, a young nurse sprang from her seat, hurrying to greet him. "Mr. Santoro," the nurse said, her voice unusually bright. "Dr. Navarro is expecting you, right this way." Keanu watched as the man was led quickly past the others, disappearing into the hallway without waiting. There was no clipboard, no numbers called, no questions asked. His hands clenched slowly in his lap. It wasn't that the man received swift treatment. It was that the others were being denied it. The people who needed help most were sitting here, suffering, ignored. After another 15 minutes, Keanu stood and approached the receptionist. He spoke softly but firmly. "Excuse me, that woman's child is burning up, and that man," he nodded toward the elderly man, "he's struggling to breathe." The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer. "Everyone waits their turn," she said flatly. "That's the policy." Keanu studied her carefully. There wasn't just indifference in her tone, there was fear. Her jaw was tight, her movements robotic. He'd seen this before. People who were afraid of stepping out of line because they knew there'd be consequences. "Whose policy?" Keanu asked gently. "The hospital's or someone else's?" She froze for a second, then forced her attention back to the screen. "Sir, please sit down. You'll be called when it's your turn." Keanu nodded slowly, backing away. He had his answer. Someone was pulling the strings, and fear was how they kept people quiet. He needed to see who it was. As he returned to his seat, he noticed a man entering from the far side of the room, tall, clean-cut, and wearing an immaculate white lab coat. His ID badge gleamed. Dr. Victor Navarro, Chief of Emergency Medicine. There was an air about him, smug, calculated authority. He walked slowly, as if the weight of the world was beneath him, but he stood above it. His shoes polished, his hair styled to perfection. His cold eyes swept the room, looking but not seeing. A young intern carrying a clipboard rushed to his side. "Dr. Navarro, the charts you asked for." Navarro took them without a word, flipping through quickly. "This one," he said, tapping one of the files. "Priority." The intern hesitated. "Sir, that's—" Navarro cut him off with a glare. "I said priority." The intern nodded quickly and scurried away. Keanu noted the chart name, Santoro, the wealthy man who had just been ushered in. After Navarro's sharp gaze flickered briefly to the waiting area, he sneered. "What's the point of triage if you don't weed out the dead weight?" he muttered, loud enough for Keanu to hear. And that was when Keanu saw it. The look on the staff's faces, not respect, fear. Even those who wanted to speak up didn't. They wouldn't. Navarro was untouchable. Minutes later, the young mother with the feverish child tried again. She stood, her face desperate, clutching her son tighter. "Please, someone, my baby, he's not breathing right." Dr. Navarro glanced her way with open disdain. He sighed heavily, then waved a dismissive hand at the nurse behind him. "Tell her to wait, like everyone else." The nurse hesitated, visibly torn, but obeyed. She walked up to the mother. "Ma'am, please sit down. A doctor will see you when it's your turn." Tears welled up in the mother's eyes. She hugged her son tighter, whispering to him, as if it was the only thing holding her together. Keanu felt something crack inside him, but he said nothing. Not yet. He watched as Navarro moved through the halls like a king surveying his court. He entered a patient room where an elderly woman lay quietly in bed. Moments later, Keanu could hear his sharp voice through the partially closed door. "You're fine," Navarro barked. "You've wasted everyone's time. Go home. Next!" The woman's weak voice replied, "But doctor, I still feel—" Navarro cut her off. "Maybe you're lonely. Go bother someone else." Keanu's stomach turned. This wasn't negligence. It was cruelty. Cold and intentional. For an hour, Keanu sat quietly, watching, listening. Patient after patient dismissed. The ones who paid or had influence were whisked behind closed doors. Others were left to wait, to suffer. Finally, Keanu's number was called. He rose, following a nurse down the hall. She led him to Navarro's office, the door heavy and polished. Inside, Navarro didn't even glance up from his desk. "Symptoms?" he asked flatly. Keanu sat, his voice calm. "Fatigue? Muscle pain?" Navarro sighed. "Overworked. Go home. Rest." He scribbled something on a piece of paper and shoved it across the desk. "Next." Keanu didn't move. "You haven't even looked at me." Navarro raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to. I've been doing this for 20 years. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on Navarro. "And how many people have you ignored in those 20 years?" For a brief second, Navarro looked confused. Then his expression hardened. "Who are you to question me?" Keanu stood slowly. "I'm someone who cares what happens in this hospital." Navarro's smirk returned. "Well, caring doesn't pay the bills." Keanu stared at him, memorizing the coldness in his eyes. He said nothing more. Not here. Not yet. But soon. As he walked out of the office, the nurse who had led him in whispered, "Be careful. He ruins anyone who crosses him." Keanu gave a small nod. He had seen enough. The problem wasn't just Navarro. It was deeper. A hospital built on promises, now broken. and he was going to fix it. The waiting area had settled into a grim quiet. Keanu sat with his back straight, hands resting on his knees, every fiber of him coiled with restraint. He'd seen enough to know something was deeply wrong, but he needed to understand how far it went. The doors to the emergency wing slid open again, and this time, a young man stumbled through them. He clutched his left hand with his right, and bright red blood seeped through the spaces between his fingers. His clothes were simple, a construction worker by the look of it, his jeans stained with paint and dust. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and his face was pale, but his expression was calm in the way that only someone used to enduring pain could be. Keanu watched him approach the reception desk. "Please," the young man said. "I had an accident on site. I just need stitches. The bleeding won't stop." The receptionist barely looked up. "Take a seat. Someone will be with you." The man glanced down at his hand, then back up at her. "Ma'am, I think it's pretty deep. I feel dizzy. Can I get it checked sooner?" She shrugged. "You don't have an appointment and you don't have insurance. Take a seat." Keanu clenched his jaw. He had half a mind to walk over right then, but he didn't. Not yet. The young man shuffled to an empty seat nearby, his breathing shallow. Blood still dripped slowly onto the cheap tile floor. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No one came. Finally, a nurse appeared, pushing a metal tray of supplies down the hallway. She glanced at the man's bleeding hand and frowned. "Wait here," she said quickly, before disappearing around the corner. Keanu tracked her. She entered a room. Moments later, Dr. Victor Navarro emerged. Keanu watched Navarro walk toward the injured man. For a moment he thought maybe, just maybe, the doctor was about to help. "Stand up," Navarro barked. The young man obeyed, his legs shaky as he rose to his feet. Navarro reached out, grabbed the man's wrist, and yanked his injured hand up to eye level. The man winced but said nothing. Navarro inspected the wound for less than 2 seconds before scoffing. "This?" he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "You're wasting my time with this." The young man flinched. "I was told it needed stitches." "It needs a Band-Aid and some guts," Navarro sneered. "You think this is an emergency? There are people dying in here, and you're standing around because of a scratch?" Keanu saw the redness in the young man's cheeks. Shame. Navarro shook his head with disgust. "Go home. Put some ice on it. Stop wasting resources." "But," the young man started to say, then stopped himself. His shoulders slumped. Keanu rose from his chair, his movements calm but deliberate. He crossed the floor in 3 long strides and stood between Navarro and the injured man. "Let me see your hand," Keanu said gently. The young man blinked at him. Who are you?" "Someone who cares," Keanu replied. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clean cloth. Carefully, he unwrapped the blood-soaked rag covering the man's hand. The gash was deep, at least 2 inches long, and the bleeding hadn't slowed. It needed stitches, probably 5 or 6. Keanu applied firm pressure with the clean cloth and guided the young man back into his chair. Navarro stood frozen for a second, as if trying to process the fact that someone had dared to intervene. Then he chuckled humorlessly. "Fine," he said, turning on his heel. "Patch him up yourself." Keanu didn't look up. "That's exactly what I'm doing." Navarro walked away without another word, his white coat flaring behind him. A few moments later, a soft voice spoke from nearby. "You shouldn't have done that." Keanu turned his head and saw one of the nurses standing a few feet away. She was young, maybe late 20s, her dark hair tied back in a tight bun. Her badge read, "Nurse Clara Ortiz." "Why?" Keanu asked. Clara glanced around to make sure Navarro was out of earshot before stepping closer. "Dr. Navarro runs this place. We don't cross him." Keanu frowned. "He doesn't run it, he works here." Clara shook her head quickly. "You don't understand. He's untouchable. The administrators love him. He moves patients through faster than anyone else. He keeps the hospital numbers high. Fewer complaints, faster turnover, fewer expenses." Keanu's mouth went dry. What happens if you speak up? Her lips pressed into a thin line. People lose shifts, get demoted. Sometimes they just disappear from the schedule. He makes life hell for anyone who gets in his way. Keanu glanced back at the injured man. He was holding the cloth to his hand, his expression confused but hopeful. He smiled faintly when Keanu caught his eye. The vision Keanu had held for this hospital, his hospital, was crumbling right in front of him. A place that was supposed to be safe, dignified, compassionate, was now cold and calculated. A numbers game. "Thank you," Keanu said softly to Clara, "for being honest." She nodded quickly and stepped back into the crowd, blending in once again. Keanu knew what he had to do next. He needed proof, more than his word. He needed to know how deep the rot ran. That night, Keanu stayed in the waiting area long after Navarro left for the evening. He watched as the night shift staff cleaned up, whispered in small groups, and avoided looking him in the eye. When the waiting room emptied out, he approached a janitor mopping near the vending machines. The man looked up warily. "Hi," Keanu said quietly. "I'm looking for someone who knows what's really going on around here." The janitor hesitated. "You shouldn't ask questions like that." Keanu offered a faint smile. "I'm not just asking." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card. It had no name, just a number. "If you want to tell me the truth, call me." The janitor took the card, staring at it as if it might bite him. Then he slipped it into his pocket and nodded once. Over the next several days, Keanu returned again and again, always as himself but still in disguise. He sat in waiting rooms, bought coffee from vending machines, held the door open for visitors. Slowly, quietly, he began talking to the staff. It wasn't easy. Many ignored him, some dismissed him outright, but others wanted to talk. Once they realized someone was listening, they began to tell him stories. One by one, Keanu gathered them. A nurse demoted for flagging incomplete patient files. A technician fired for suggesting more time be spent on critical patients. A receptionist who tried to call social services for an abused child, only to have Navarro intervene and silence her. And more. The theme was always the same. Navarro ruled through fear. Management protected him because his numbers looked good on paper. Efficiency, profits, high turnover, shorter wait times. If you could pay. If you couldn't, you waited, or you died. Keanu took careful notes. He recorded conversations when it was safe. He met with staff outside the hospital after hours. He spoke to patients who had been turned away. Every word, every document, every story. It was building a case. But it wasn't just about Navarro anymore. Keanu realized the corruption ran straight to the top. The hospital administrators were complicit. They were hiding behind spreadsheets and statistics, turning a blind eye to cruelty. And he knew without a doubt that firing Navarro wouldn't be enough. He needed to tear the whole system apart and rebuild it from the ground up. But first, he needed one last thing. He needed Navarro to expose himself publicly, to prove, without question, who he really was. And Keanu already had a plan. Tomorrow, he would return to the hospital, not as a patient, not in disguise, as himself, and he was bringing the truth with him. Keanu Reeves stood in the hospital parking lot early the next morning. The sky was still dark, but he knew the day ahead would be one of the most important in his life. The weight on his shoulders felt heavy, but not unbearable. He was ready. No more disguises, no more waiting. He smoothed the front of his jacket, an unassuming black blazer over a dark t-shirt. No security, no entourage, just himself. But this time, he wasn't an anonymous patient. He was the owner. And he was here to take back what had been stolen, the dignity, compassion, and purpose of his hospital. He walked through the front doors. Several of the staff gave him only cursory glances, not realizing who he was. The same receptionist from the night before was there, her tired fingers clattering on the keyboard, her attitude just as cold. She didn't look up as she said, Fill out a form if you need assistance." Keanu didn't stop at the desk. Instead, he headed straight for the administrator's office. His steps were measured, but inside, his pulse was steady and resolved. The glass plaque on the door read, "Daniel Cross, Hospital Administrator." He gave a soft knock. No response. He turned the handle and entered. Daniel Cross sat behind a massive oak desk, staring at his computer screen. He looked up, eyebrows knitting at the unexpected visitor. Cross was a tall man with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had the look of someone who spent his life staring at balance sheets instead of people. "Excuse me," Keanu said calmly. Cross peered at him. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." Keanu stepped forward. "But you're going to want to hear what I have to say." Cross sighed and gestured to the chair across from him. "Make it quick, I'm busy." Keanu sat down, placing both hands flat on the desk. "I'm Keanu Reeves." Cross's face froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He stared at Keanu as if he couldn't quite process the words. Keanu leaned in just a fraction. "And I own this hospital." The silence was so thick, it felt suffocating. Cross's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he stammered. You're here?" "I've been here," Keanu said. "I came in last night as a patient, sat in your waiting room, watched everything, spoke to your staff, watched patients ignored, watched Dr. Victor Navarro humiliate and dismiss people who needed help." Cross licked his lips. "Mr. Reeves, I can't explain—" "No," Keanu interrupted. His voice was steady, cold now. "You will listen, and you will bring Navarro here. Now." Cross's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the phone on his desk. He pressed the intercom button and spoke, his voice strained. "Page, Dr. Navarro, tell him to report to my office immediately." They waited. Keanu didn't move. His breathing was even, but his eyes remained locked on Cross, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his gaze. Cross tugged at his collar, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and muttered, "I had no idea you were coming, sir. If I had known—" "If you had known, you would have staged a performance," Keanu said, "and I would never have seen the truth." A knock sounded at the door. Cross jumped. "Come in," he barked. The door swung open, and in walked Dr. Victor Navarro, his white coat immaculate, his confidence unshaken. His steps were sure, his expression bored. "This better be important, Daniel," he said as he shut the door behind him. "I have patients waiting." Then Navarro's eyes fell on Keanu. He frowned. "You again?" He chuckled. "What are you doing in here? Filing a complaint because I didn't kiss your hand yesterday?" Cross cleared his throat. "Dr. Navarro, meet Mr. Keanu Reeves." Navarro stared blankly. "Yeah, I know who he looks like. I'm not blind." "No," Cross said, his voice breaking slightly. "This is Keanu Reeves. He owns this hospital." For a moment, there was only silence. Navarro blinked. Slowly, the color drained from his face. His arrogant smirk faltered. His gaze flicked back and forth between Keanu and Cross as the truth settled in. Keanu stood, his presence commanding. "I saw how you treated people yesterday. The mother with the feverish baby, the elderly man struggling to breathe, the young man with the cut hand." Navarro opened his mouth to speak, but Keanu cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You humiliated them, mocked them, ignored them, and you did it without a shred of guilt." Navarro bristled. "I do my job. My numbers are the best in this place. I keep the system running. Without me, this hospital falls apart." Keanu's jaw tightened. "No. Without compassion, this hospital falls apart. Without dignity, this hospital fails. And right now, it has failed." Navarro scoffed. "I've done nothing wrong. I follow the rules." "You've done nothing right," Keanu said coldly. "You treat people like numbers, like they're beneath you." Cross tried to interject. "Mr. Reeves, if I may." Keanu's eyes snapped to him. "You allowed this to happen. You knew, and you did nothing because the numbers made you look good." Cross fell silent, his shoulders sagging. Keanu turned back to Navarro. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Navarro took a step back, his face pale. "You can't—" "I can, and I did." Keanu's voice never wavered. "You will not step foot in this hospital again. Your credentials are revoked. Your access is terminated. You are done here." Cross stood up suddenly as if to defend himself. "Please, Mr. Reeves, let's not make any rash—" Keanu faced him squarely. "This ends today. Not tomorrow, not after a meeting. Right now." He pressed a button on the phone himself. "Security to the administrator's office. Escort Dr. Navarro from the premises." Navarro's chest heaved as the door opened and 2 security guards entered. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but one look at Keanu's expression told him it was over. He turned, his face twisted in rage and disbelief, and stormed out, the guards close behind. Keanu waited until the door closed, then he faced Cross. "And you?" Cross lowered his eyes. I'll resign if you wish." Keanu shook his head slowly. "You'll stay. And you'll fix this. Under my watch. I'll be here every day until this hospital is what it was meant to be." Cross exhaled slowly. "Yes, sir." Keanu sat back down. "We start now. First, a full audit of staff behavior. We set up an anonymous reporting system. We bring in patient advocates. No one waits for care because they can't pay. No one gets ignored." Cross nodded rapidly, taking notes. "Understood." Keanu leaned forward. "And if anyone breaks those rules, they'll answer to me." The administrator swallowed hard. "Yes, Mr. Reeves." Keanu stood again. "Prepare an all-staff meeting. Today." Cross reached for his phone as Keanu turned and walked out. By the time he stepped into the main lobby, the energy was already shifting. Nurses whispered as they watched him pass. A few aides smiled tentatively. Even patients began to murmur, recognizing who he was. But Keanu didn't slow down. He headed straight for the waiting room where the mother with the feverish baby sat, eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. He knelt beside her. "How's your baby?" he asked softly. Her eyes widened as she recognized him. "Better. They're taking care of him now." Keanu smiled faintly. "Good. No one should ever wait for help." He stood, turning toward the others in the room. Their eyes followed him. Keanu took a deep breath. "We're making changes," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Starting today. No more waiting. No more being ignored." A few people clapped quietly. A ripple of hope passed through the room. Later that afternoon, Keanu stood on the hospital's main stage, addressing the entire staff. Doctors, nurses, technicians, janitors, everyone. "This hospital was built on a promise," Keanu said, "that everyone deserves dignity and compassion. Somewhere along the way we lost that, but we're taking it back. Together." They listened, some skeptical, some hopeful, but as he spoke, they realized he meant every word. "This ends today," Keanu finished. "You have my word." And they believed him. The sun had barely dipped beneath the horizon when Keanu Reeves stood on the main stage of his hospital's conference hall. The room, usually reserved for sterile presentations and dull administrative meetings, now thrummed with an unusual energy. Every staff member, doctors, nurses, janitors, receptionists, and technicians, had been called in for an emergency meeting. No one knew why. Whispers buzzed from the corners of the room, and side glances were exchanged like currency. At the front of the room, Keanu stood in simple black slacks and a white shirt, his presence both commanding and calm. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, settling briefly on familiar faces. Some looked nervous, others were curious, many looked tired, just as he remembered from his undercover visits. Daniel Cross, the hospital administrator, sat stiffly at Keanu's right. The man was clearly tense but compliant now. He'd seen what Keanu could do and knew this meeting was not for show. Security guards flanked the doors, not to intimidate, but to ensure the meeting remained orderly. They were under Keanu's direct orders to act only if needed. Keanu took a slow breath and stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried an undeniable weight. "You're probably wondering why I've called this meeting," he began. "For many of you, this hospital is just a place where you work. For me, it's personal. It's where I invested my heart and my fortune, and it's where we promise to treat every human being with dignity." A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others avoided his gaze. Keanu continued, his voice growing firmer. "But last night, I saw something I can't unsee. I saw patients treated as if they didn't matter. I saw fear and silence where there should have been compassion and courage. I saw a hospital that had lost its soul." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. "Starting tonight, that changes." A low buzz of conversation broke out among the staff. Keanu held up a hand and the room quieted immediately. "From this moment forward," he announced, "we're implementing sweeping changes, and I need every one of you to understand that this isn't temporary. This is a revolution." The word hung there. Revolution. It wasn't one they heard often inside sterile walls and fluorescent lighting. But it was the only word that fit. Keanu turned to Daniel Cross and nodded. Cross stood up and unrolled a large poster, pinning it to the board behind Keanu. In bold, clear letters it read, "New mandates, effective immediately. 1. Anonymous complaint and reporting system. 2. Mandatory empathy and patient care training. 3. Equal treatment for all patients, regardless of wealth or status. 4. Strict disciplinary action against any staff violating these standards." Keanu let the staff read through it, then spoke again. "The anonymous complaint system is already live. If you see abuse, neglect, or discrimination, you report it. No fear of retaliation. We will protect every whistleblower." Several staff members exchanged wide-eyed glances. Every staff member, doctors, nurses, technicians, janitors, will undergo mandatory empathy and patient care training. If you refuse to attend, you can hand in your resignation. A ripple of nervousness spread through the crowd. Keanu pressed on. "There will be no more preferential treatment for the wealthy. If you can't treat every human being who walks through these doors with respect and dignity, you're free to leave now." Silence. Heavy. Palpable. Keanu searched the faces in front of him. Some were clearly skeptical, some frightened, but a few looked hopeful, relieved even. He knew it would take time to win them over. Time and action. Then, just as he expected, a sharp voice sliced through the quiet. "This is ridiculous." All eyes turned. At the back of the room, standing near the doors with his arms crossed, was Dr. Victor Navarro. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. Despite being fired earlier, he'd forced his way into the meeting, and judging by the sneer on his face, he wasn't leaving quietly. Keanu's expression remained calm. "You're not supposed to be here, Navarro." Navarro took a step forward. "This is still my hospital. I built the reputation here. I brought in the top donors. I kept this place profitable." Keanu didn't flinch. "You humiliated patients, ignored the suffering of the poor. You treated this hospital like your personal kingdom." Navarro's sneer deepened. "And what's your plan, Reeves? Bankrupt the place by coddling every sob story that walks in the door?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "No. My plan is to make this hospital a place where people find hope, not humiliation." Navarro shook his head. "You're making a mistake, a huge one. I have connections, legal options. You fire me and I'll sue you for wrongful termination, defamation, you name it." Keanu's eyes didn't waver. "You were fired for cause, documented cause, and as for your legal threats," he turned to Daniel Cross, who nodded grimly and handed Keanu a thick folder. Keanu held it up. "These are testimonies from staff and patients, as well as footage from security cameras. You have no case." For the first time, Navarro's bravado faltered. His eyes flickered toward the security guards now approaching him slowly. "You'll regret this," Navarro snarled. "You'll ruin everything." Keanu took a step forward, his voice like steel. "No, Dr. Navarro. You ruined everything. I'm here to rebuild it." The guards reached Navarro. He yanked his arms away as they tried to guide him out. "I'll be back," he hissed. "This isn't over." Keanu met his gaze one last time. "You're right. It isn't over. But for you, it is." The doors swung shut behind Navarro as the guards escorted him out. A heavy silence followed his exit. No one spoke. No one moved. Keanu turned back to the crowd. "I know some of you may feel afraid. I know this is a big change, but this is how we move forward. Together." An older nurse, her hands trembling, raised her voice. "Does this mean we can finally treat people the way we've always wanted to?" Keanu gave a small smile. "Yes, without fear." A ripple of cautious applause began. Then louder. Soon the entire room was clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others with hope. Keanu let them have the moment. They needed it. After the applause quieted, he spoke again. "We'll work together on this. There will be training, open-door policies, and a renewed focus on patient care. We will honor every person who walks through these doors." He nodded toward Daniel Cross. "Cross will be responsible for overseeing the implementation. I'll be checking in daily." Cross gave a resigned but determined nod. "And one more thing," Keanu added. "There's no more hierarchy of importance. Everyone here matters, from the janitors who keep us clean to the surgeons in the OR. We're a team." The nurse who had spoken earlier wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, changes began to take root. The staff left the meeting with mixed emotions: fear, hope, excitement. But for the first time in years, they felt something new: purpose. Keanu stayed late. He walked through the halls himself, checking in on patients. The young mother whose baby had been ignored was now in a private room, receiving the best care. Keanu watched from the doorway as a nurse gently checked the baby's temperature. In another room, the elderly man with chest pains was recovering comfortably. Keanu stepped in quietly and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "How are you feeling?" he asked. The old man smiled faintly. "Better. Thank you." Keanu nodded and left quietly. As he stood outside the hospital that night, looking up at the building glowing under the stars, Keanu felt something shift inside him. He had begun to fix what was broken, but he knew this was just the beginning. The revolution had started, and he was ready to lead it. The days that followed the emergency staff meeting marked a turning point. For the first time in months, maybe years, hope seemed to seep into the walls of Keanu Reeves Hospital. Where there had once been an atmosphere of cold detachment and fear, a different energy was beginning to grow. And Keanu was at the center of it, ensuring that the promises he made weren't just words spoken in a conference room. He arrived early every morning, not in a tailored suit or surrounded by bodyguards, but in jeans and a plain black t-shirt. The staff quickly learned that he wasn't here for photo opportunities or press releases. Keanu moved quietly through the halls, speaking to nurses and janitors, greeting patients in waiting rooms, and listening to their concerns with unwavering attention. The changes began small, but were immediately felt. The receptionist, who had once ignored the desperate pleas of a young mother, was now retrained and working under supervision. She was the first to be sent through the empathy and patient care program Keanu had mandated. It was intense and humbling work, but she wasn't the only one. Every employee, from the cafeteria cooks to the head surgeons, underwent training designed not just to sharpen their medical skills, but to remind them of why they had chosen this profession in the first place: to heal, to help, to serve. Within the first week, Keanu implemented an anonymous reporting system. Reports of mistreatment and neglect, which had previously been silenced, now found their way to a newly appointed ethics committee. For the first time, staff had a safe way to speak out. Keanu personally reviewed the first several cases, ensuring swift and fair action was taken. But perhaps the most immediate and visible changes were in how patients were treated. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Keanu was walking the floor of the pediatric wing when he noticed her. The same young mother who had once begged for help at the front desk, holding her feverish baby in her arms while being ignored. Now, she sat in a clean, bright room, rocking her child gently as a smiling nurse checked the baby's vitals. The baby, whose cheeks were no longer flushed with fever, cooed softly, clutching a small toy in his tiny hand. The mother looked up and saw Keanu standing silently at the doorway. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Keanu nodded once, a quiet smile forming on his lips. He didn't need to say anything. This moment was what it was all about. Later that day, Keanu made his rounds in the cardiology wing and stopped by another familiar face, the elderly man who had once clutched his chest in the waiting area. Ignored by the staff, now lay in a proper bed, recovering from a successful procedure. As Keanu approached, the man opened his eyes. Recognition flickered in them, followed by something deeper: gratitude. Keanu sat beside the bed, his hands resting on his knees. "How are you feeling?" Keanu asked. The old man gave a weak smile. "Like someone finally saw me." Keanu chuckled softly. "You were always seen. They just forgot how to look." The old man nodded, his eyes misting over. "Thank you for giving us hope." Word began to spread beyond the hospital walls. Families who had once sworn never to return now gave the hospital a second chance. Poor patients who had once been turned away or dismissed found open doors and welcoming arms. Keanu insisted that no patient be treated according to their ability to pay. The hospital's finances were a concern, but he was prepared to invest more of his fortune to keep it running on the values he held dear. And it wasn't just the patients who were changing, the staff. Those who had been beaten down by a toxic environment began to stand taller. Smiles became more common. Laughter, which had once felt out of place, could be heard in hallways and staff lounges. People began to look each other in the eye again. Daniel Cross, once seen as a cold and distant administrator, began taking regular walks through the wards with Keanu. It was clear he had been changed by what he'd seen. He no longer hid behind numbers and reports, but made decisions based on compassion and fairness. Then came a quiet moment that would stay with Keanu for the rest of his life. One afternoon, after an exhausting day of overseeing staff restructuring and attending patient meetings, Keanu sat on a bench in the hospital garden. The sky above was pale blue, and a light breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers planted by volunteers who had returned to support the hospital's new direction. As he rested, a small voice called out, "Mr. Reeves?" He turned and saw a little girl, no older than 7, approaching shyly. She wore a hospital bracelet on her wrist and held something small in her hands. Her name was Mia. Keanu remembered her from his rounds in pediatrics. She was recovering from a difficult surgery, one that might not have been performed at all before the changes. Keanu smiled and motioned for her to join him on the bench. She climbed up and handed him the object in her hand. It was a bracelet, made of colorful plastic beads and simple string. At its center was a small charm in the shape of a heart. "I made this for you," Mia said softly. Keanu looked at her, his throat tightening. "For me?" She nodded. "You saved us. Mommy said, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Keanu took the bracelet carefully as though it were a priceless treasure. "Thank you, Mia," he whispered. He slipped it onto his wrist, the colors bright against his skin. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the garden swaying gently in the breeze. Later, as Keanu walked back into the hospital, the bracelet still on his wrist, he was met by a crowd of staff who had gathered near the reception area. They had planned a small ceremony, something Keanu hadn't approved, but didn't have the heart to stop. One of the nurses stepped forward, holding a simple plaque engraved with new words. St. Jude's Hospital, a place of hope, healing, and dignity. Rededicated by Keanu Reeves. The staff clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Keanu held the plaque for a moment before placing it on the wall right at the entrance. It was a new dawn for this hospital. And it wasn't because of him alone. It was because people had found their courage again. As the weeks turned into months, Keanu continued to check in regularly. He didn't just rely on reports or updates from administrators. He spoke directly to patients, to their families. He sat in waiting rooms, just as he had that first night in disguise, to observe how things were really working. And whenever he felt doubt creeping in, he would glance down at the simple bracelet on his wrist. It reminded him of Mia, of the elderly man in recovery, of the mother who had cradled her feverish baby in desperation, but now smiled in gratitude. They were the reason he had built this place, and now they were his reason to keep fighting for it. Keanu knew the real work had just begun. It didn't take long before whispers of what had happened inside St. Jude's Hospital began to ripple beyond its walls. What started as hushed conversations between staff and patients soon reached the surrounding neighborhood, then the entire city. And eventually, it caught the attention of the media. But Keanu Reeves wasn't interested in making headlines. Reporters camped outside the hospital's entrance, cameras poised and microphones ready, hoping for a glimpse or a comment. But day after day, Keanu refused interviews. His focus wasn't on public image or repairing a reputation. He was there to rebuild trust with the people who depended on St. Jude's. Quiet leadership was his way, and this was no exception. Still, the world took notice. One morning, Daniel Cross, the hospital's administrator, found himself fielding phone calls from executives of other hospitals across the country. They weren't calling to gawk at the scandal that had erupted weeks before. They were calling because they had heard about the transformation, the courage to confront corruption, the commitment to empathy, the way Keanu had torn down a broken system and rebuilt it from the inside out. "We want to implement something similar," one hospital CEO said. "How did you get your staff to believe in this again?" Daniel smiled quietly as he replied, "We didn't ask them to believe in policies or procedures. We asked them to believe in people again." That answer spread as quickly as the story itself. Within weeks, Keanu was receiving requests to visit hospitals in other cities and advise their boards of directors. He politely declined most of them, choosing instead to focus on making sure the change at St. Jude's was permanent. He knew better than anyone how easy it was for old habits to creep back in when no one was watching. He wasn't going anywhere, and yet the ripple effect was undeniable. Patients who had once sworn never to return to St. Jude's were now back, but not because they were sick. They came to volunteer. Mary Ann Thompson, the mother who had once begged for help at the front desk with her feverish baby, came back every Wednesday. She now worked with the family outreach program, comforting other parents waiting anxiously in the pediatric ward. "You saved my boy," she told Keanu one morning. "I want to help others now." Others followed. Former patients cleaned waiting rooms, helped organize supplies, even sat and read stories to children who were too scared to sleep. It was as if the hospital itself was healing, and those who had suffered most were now the ones helping it recover. Keanu watched it happen quietly, his usual stoic expression masking the warmth he felt deep inside. But there was more work to do. One rainy afternoon, Keanu sat with Daniel Cross in his newly remodeled office. The walls were painted a calming shade of green, and photos of patients and staff decorated the space, no longer sterile and cold, but alive. "We need more," Keanu said. Daniel frowned. "More? Mental health care," Keanu replied, "and veteran services. I've seen too many people fall through the cracks because they couldn't afford it, or didn't trust the system." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "We have the space, but not the funding." Keanu smiled faintly. "We do now." Within a week, construction had begun on 2 new wings of the hospital, one dedicated entirely to mental health services, offering therapy and counseling regardless of a patient's ability to pay. The other, a center for veterans, where soldiers like Marcus Bell could get the support they deserved. Marcus had been one of the first veterans Keanu had helped at St. Jude's after the reforms, a former Marine who had battled PTSD and homelessness, Marcus had wandered into the hospital weeks earlier looking for help. He had been met with compassion and care, and for the first time in years, he believed he had a future. So when Keanu approached him with a job offer, Marcus had hesitated only for a second. "Head of security?" Marcus asked. "You've protected people your whole life," Keanu replied. "I need someone who understands what it means to keep people safe, not just from threats, but from fear." Marcus accepted. Under his leadership, the hospital's security staff transformed. No longer just guards who enforced rules, they became protectors. Trained in de-escalation, empathy, and compassion, Marcus personally mentored new hires, often sharing his own story with them. And soon, he became one of the hospital's most beloved figures. It was not uncommon to see Marcus kneeling beside a frightened child or offering a steady hand to an elderly patient struggling to stand. He also became a vocal advocate for veterans' care, using his story to raise awareness and funding for the new wing Keanu had envisioned. "Keanu didn't just give me a job," Marcus told one local news station. "He gave me purpose. And he's giving that to a lot of us." One day, Mia, the young girl who had gifted Keanu the handmade bracelet weeks before, returned with her mother. She was healthier now, her color bright, her energy infectious. She ran through the halls like they were her playground, smiling at everyone she passed. And she had another gift. This time, it was a drawing, a sketch of Keanu standing in front of the hospital, with people smiling all around him. Above it, in bold, colorful letters, were the words, "Kindness heals." Keanu took the drawing quietly, his throat tightening. "Thank you, Mia," he whispered. Daniel Cross was there, watching the exchange. "You know," Daniel said later that day, "we should have something like that on the building." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "A mural?" "Exactly." Within a month, local artists were commissioned to paint the hospital's front wall. It took several weeks of planning and work, but when it was finished, it took everyone's breath away. The mural depicted scenes of healing and compassion: a nurse holding a child, a doctor sitting beside an elderly patient, volunteers helping families. At the center stood Keanu, not as a movie star, but as a man wearing simple clothes, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl. Mia. Above them, painted in bold letters that could be seen from the street, "Kindness heals." The unveiling ceremony was simple, just as Keanu had requested. No media frenzy, no red carpet. Just staff, patients, and volunteers standing together, some holding candles, others holding hands. As the final piece of tarp was pulled away from the mural, Keanu stood silently among them, his heart heavy in the best way. Daniel leaned over and said quietly, "You did this." Keanu shook his head. "We did this." And the truth was, they had. Months later, Keanu would continue to walk the halls of St. Jude's, not as its owner, but as its guardian. He kept his promises to stay involved, and he never let the leadership forget the mission. When other hospitals asked for guidance, he sent them the training programs he and Daniel had designed, with a simple message attached: put people first. It wasn't about numbers. It wasn't about efficiency reports. It was about human dignity. And as St. Jude's continued to thrive, Keanu's quiet leadership became the model others tried to follow. He would always remain humble about it. When journalists finally managed to corner him for a comment, asking why he did all this without fanfare, Keanu just smiled and said, "Kindness doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs a place to grow." And at St. Jude's Hospital, kindness had found a home. 1 year had passed. The morning sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the city as Keanu Reeves rode his motorcycle along the coastal highway. The engine's steady hum was comforting, grounding him as the wind tugged at his jacket. His mind wandered, as it often did these days, not to the red carpets or film sets, but to a place that had become far more important to him: St. Jude's Hospital. He turned onto a quieter street, slowing as the familiar brick building came into view. Gone were the cold, sterile banners once hung over its entrance. Instead, the mural greeted him like an old friend. Bold letters stretched across the front wall: "Kindness heals." beneath which children played while their parents watched from benches shaded by new trees. Keanu parked his bike a block away, removed his helmet, and ran a hand through his hair. No entourage, no announcements. Just himself. He walked toward the entrance, his boots falling softly on the pavement. A woman in scrubs held the door open for him without realizing who he was. He smiled at her, and she returned the gesture, distracted by a clipboard full of patient notes. He stepped inside and for a moment stood still. The lobby was quiet but alive, not with chaos, with calm. Patients waited patiently, reading books or chatting softly. A child giggled as a nurse tied a cartoon-themed bandage around his finger. An elderly man sat sipping tea, a volunteer at his side. There was no fear, no frustration. Keanu exhaled slowly. It was working. He walked toward the reception desk. A young woman sat there. Anna, if he remembered her name correctly. She greeted each person with a kind word and a patient smile. He watched her as a nervous teenage boy approached. "First time here?" Anna asked gently. The boy nodded. "Well, you're in good hands." She handed him a form and leaned in just a little closer. "You're not alone." Keanu felt a warmth in his chest. That simple kindness had been missing when he first walked these halls, disguised as just another patient. Now, it was everywhere. He moved on, keeping to the background, unnoticed by most. He didn't mind. He preferred it this way. Down one hallway, he spotted Daniel Cross, standing with a small group of hospital administrators, their heads bent in conversation. Daniel's suit was more casual now, his tie loose. He laughed softly at something one of the nurses said, and Keanu caught the glimpse of pride on his face. They had come a long way. As Keanu turned a corner, a young girl's voice called out, "Mr. Keanu." He looked up, his eyes meeting Mia's. She was older now, stronger. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail and she wore a handmade bracelet, matching the one she'd given him months ago, which he still wore tucked under his sleeve. She ran toward him, her mother following with a grateful smile. "You came back," Mia said, her eyes wide. "I did," Keanu replied, crouching so they were eye level. "I wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm good. I help here sometimes now. Mommy and me read stories to the kids waiting to see the doctor." Keanu smiled. "I'm proud of you." She beamed and hugged him, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around his neck. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, holding on to the feeling. When they pulled apart, Mia's mother whispered, "Thank you. You changed everything here." Keanu shook his head. "We all did." He continued his walk. Along the way, he saw Marcus Bell, now in his role as head of security, helping a confused elderly couple find their way to radiology. Marcus's once hard expression had softened. He spoke gently, pointing them toward the elevators, then offering his arm to steady the man as they walked together. Later, Keanu stepped into the mental health wing. The rooms were bright and welcoming. On one wall was another mural, this one a tree whose leaves had names inscribed on them. Names of patients who had found healing here. Names of people who had come back to volunteer. Names of hope. A young woman in scrubs approached him. "Mr. Reeves?" He nodded. I just wanted to thank you. I used to be a patient here. Now I work here." Keanu's gaze softened. "I'm glad you're here." She smiled through glassy eyes. "Me too." Later, he made his way to the administrative office, the same room where, a year ago, he'd revealed his identity to Daniel Cross and ended Navarro's reign. It felt different now, lighter. He stood quietly at the doorway. Daniel noticed him and waved him in. "You've been quiet," Daniel said, smiling. "I prefer to watch," Keanu replied. They stood together, looking at the hospital through the window. Daniel sighed. "You know, we still have work to do." "We always will," Keanu said. "But you're keeping the promise?" Daniel nodded. "Every day." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Keanu turned toward the door. "Leaving so soon?" Daniel asked. Keanu smirked. "I've got a ride, waiting." He walked back through the hospital, the weight of responsibility still there, but no longer heavy. It was balanced now, shared with people who cared. At the entrance, he paused to look at the mural once more. A little boy ran past, laughing, his laughter echoing in the open air. Keanu watched him go, then took a deep breath and pushed open the doors. The sky was streaked with orange and pink as the sun dipped low. He walked to his motorcycle, slid on his helmet, and started the engine. It rumbled to life beneath him. Before he rode away, he looked back one last time. "Keep it this way," he murmured to no one in particular, but he knew the right people would hear it. Then he revved the engine and pulled away from the curb. The hospital faded into the distance behind him, but Keanu knew it was in good hands. He had left it better than he found it, and he would always be ready to return if they needed him. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Keanu Reeves rode into the twilight, a quiet man, a quiet hero, leaving behind a legacy of compassion, dignity, and hope. Keanu Reeves didn't act for fame, he acted for dignity. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon, Keanu's motorcycle vanished into the glow of twilight. His name wasn't carved on a wall inside St. Jude's Hospital. There wasn't a bronze statue of him standing proudly at the entrance. No, he didn't want that. That wasn't the reason he did it. His legacy wasn't in headlines or handshakes. It was in the quiet revolution he sparked, one life at a time. And sometimes, that's where true heroism lives. You see, Keanu never forgot where he came from. Long before the world knew his name, he had stood in waiting rooms just like the one he sat in that first night, quiet, overlooked, hoping someone would care. It was those moments that shaped him, made him vow that if he ever had the power to make a difference, he wouldn't hesitate. And when he saw his vision slipping away inside the hospital he built, he didn't make speeches, he didn't demand applause. He walked through those doors quietly, dressed like an ordinary man, and took action when others were afraid. Because true power isn't in titles. It's in how you treat people. Keanu didn't fire Dr. Navarro because it made him feel powerful. He did it because Navarro had forgotten the sacred duty of a healer, to treat every life as valuable. And in a world obsessed with status, Keanu reminded everyone watching that human dignity can never be measured by wealth or titles. The doctors, nurses, and staff who once feared speaking out found their voices again because someone stood up first. The patients who thought no one cared found comfort because one man took the time to listen. One quiet act led to another, and another, until the entire hospital changed. And the ripple effect of that? Well, that's the beauty of kindness. News of St. Jude's transformation spread, but Keanu declined interviews. When the media camped outside the gates, he was already somewhere else, maybe helping another cause, maybe just riding his bike along the coast, thinking about his next quiet mission. What mattered to him was never being seen. It was making sure no one went unseen again. In a world hungry for recognition, it's easy to forget the quiet heroes, the ones who change lives without ever asking for thanks. Keanu Reeves became one of those quiet heroes, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that choice made all the difference. So here's the life lesson from this incredible story. True power isn't about status. It's not about fame or fortune. It's about the courage to stand up for someone when no one else will. It's about using whatever influence you have, however small, to make the world a little better. And it's about treating everyone with dignity, no matter their story. Keanu didn't give speeches about kindness. He lived it. And when he saw injustice, he didn't wait for someone else to fix it. He acted. And that's what makes him not just a movie star, but a quiet hero. Now, if you believe kindness can change the world, we invite you to like this video and share Keanu's incredible story. Because sometimes the world doesn't need another loud voice. It needs another quiet hero. And we want to hear from you. Have you ever seen a quiet hero in your life? Maybe it was a nurse who stayed late to hold someone's hand. Maybe it was a neighbor who helped without ever being asked. Or maybe it was someone who believed in you when you needed it most. We want to hear your incredible story. Share it in the comments below. You never know who you'll inspire. And if you're watching this right now thinking, I'm just one person, what difference can I make? Remember this. One man in simple clothes walked into a hospital one night and changed everything. That could be you. Thank you for watching this incredible story about Keanu Reeves and his quiet mission to bring dignity back to the people who need it most. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and quiet strength, make sure you subscribe, because we have more stories like this coming your way. Until then, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the power of a quiet hero.